Mm-hmm.
and also setting up a two-way communication there, where if there were any frustrations at the supply level that were going to impact the build, that they were brought into the equation as well, and try and proactively work with the supply chain rather than what was happening before, which was very reactive. And again, expectations weren't really set. Nobody really understood what parts were coming and when, and therefore the whole thing was very much, well, we react to whatever parts come in and build whatever is there, rather than trying to drive the suppliers to understand, the critical path, any frustrations that we're having as far as not being able to complete build, and set up that feedback loop to make sure that everybody
Mm-hmm.
was on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. All right. What about operations? Were there any operational improvements that you were able to bring about besides what we've already talked about?
I think the sequence of the build was definitely a big thing, because,
Mm-hmm.
like I say, it was very reactionary, and I also think operational wise, understanding what to build and when, and then concentrating effort on enabling the build in the correct sequence was huge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Would you say that this also impacted customer satisfaction with the product?
Yes, because the other thing is, the component or the cabin and the skateboard that we built then go on for general assembly. So that's where they put the seats in and basically populate the whole vehicle with all of the other components.
Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning, there were quite a few frustrations with regard to either missing parts from the initial sort of builds, or tolerances that weren't met,
Mm-hmm.
location of say studs or whatever that you would fix the components to weren't correct. So taking that back in, understanding the frustrations from the next customer in line were huge. So that impacted a lot on how we approached certain elements of the build, understanding what it meant to the next person along was very big, and that's still going on, looking at alternative methods for certain things like locating studs, doing it robotically instead of manually.
Mm-hmm.
The quality systems that we implemented were very much directed to looking at how we could better serve our next customer. So yeah, the final builds were drastically different from the initial ones, which it was good to see. There was definitely a lot of progress with regard to the quality of the product coming out of the facility.
Mm-hmm. All right. And is customer satisfaction something that was being measured here again?
I wouldn't say there's I mean, there are definitely, yeah, there's no specific measurement. It was more of because they're internal customers as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no specific measure that came out. It was more of a, create the communication, make sure the issue's raised, drive it through to completion,
Mm-hmm.
and
All
then
right.
make sure it doesn't come back again. But there was no I couldn't say there was a definite percentage of, they were, 30% better than they were at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So you mentioned internal customers. Who exactly are your internal customers?
So yeah, the general assembly.
Mm-hmm.
So really, like I say, the guys who are populating the cars with all of the additional components outside
Mm-hmm.
of the framework,
Mm-hmm.
and then really sort of that going on forward. Our internal customers are that's on the build side. On the commercial side, I would say, accounting, looking at
Mm-hmm.
making sure we're running the budgets. On the program
Oh, all right.
side,
Okay.
yeah.
Got it. All right. Let's see. So we've talked about one of the programs that you're working on, right? The build program. You mentioned
Yeah.
another, I believe it was the doors and windows one. Is that
Yeah. So
correct?
all of this sort of runs in together.
All
Um,
right.
so because I mean that's why the interesting thing was that, for example, on the chassis side,
Mm-hmm.
then one of the internal customers for the body in white and the skateboard was chassis, because they then bolt all of their components onto the skateboard, but I was in charge of the chassis. So in some ways I was my own supplier and customer all at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Got it. All right. Right. So since you were responsible for procurement here, were you also managing the inventory?
Yes. Yeah. So within the specific facility, that was another thing that I did, was set up an inventory management system to understand the deliverables that were coming in, how many
Mm-hmm.
parts were available, and also how many subcomponents were available as
Mm-hmm.
well.
All right. So were there any challenges with that, or did they have like a smooth management system in place?
No, there was really nothing. So it was very much a case of going in, understanding exactly where we were, so auditing all the
Mm-hmm.
parts that were at the facility, creating an area that they could be stored in, and
Mm-hmm.
then and arranged correctly, and part labeling, part marking, and then really keeping a system that was able to keep track of ingoes and outgoes, and also installing discipline on you know parts being properly booked in, properly booked out, people not just taking parts off shelf, and setting up a whole system that really controlled inventory um, from the moment it arrived to the moment that it got put onto the vehicle.
Mm-hmm. All right. And I'm assuming that also helped with meeting your milestones and your deadlines, right?
Yes.
Perfect. So were you also using anything to forecast demand, perhaps?
Sorry.
Were you predicting demand, um, customer demand?
Yes. Yes. So we were able to then, like I say, we had the program. We knew
Mm-hmm.
we were tracking the build, and then very much set up a kitting parts, understanding where we couldn't, and that really went back to the suppliers who weren't able to necessarily um, supply is in a way that we would want them to, or they were having frustrations with actually making the parts, understanding how we could manipulate the build or accommodate some of those shortfalls, or realign their focus onto certain components so that we could maintain the build. So there was give and take in both directions, but it was very much,
Mm-hmm.
rather than a reactive situation, make it proactive, make sure that all of the operators had all the parts kitted, ready to go. So all they had to do was build.
Mm-hmm. All right, got it. I'm sorry, I'm jumping back to the customer
No,
service
that's
thing
okay.
once again. I just thought of one thing. Is returns something that you have to deal with? I'm assuming customers probably don't return this sort of product often, but is that something that you experience?
Um, well, not in this specific instance, because, like I say, it was really internal customers for us. We don't have external customers yet. Um, but yeah, returns and stuff. When I look at Icon or Ducati, then yeah, I mean the whole consumer warranty law and dissatisfaction within the customer network was something that I very much had to deal with.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you said that you don't have any external customers right now. I was assuming earlier that you meant that for your department only. Does the company not have any customers at the moment?
No, no, we haven't sold it. So it's a startup. We're in the development stage of the vehicle at the moment. Um,
All right.
so
Okay.
really, yeah.
Got it. No wonder they didn't have anything in place then. Right. Um, Yeah, then I can't ask you about revenue or anything. What about employee engagement here? Is
Uh,
because it's a startup, right? So do you have
right.
issues with turnover or morale or something?
Yeah, I mean, we do at the moment, and there's some challenges with funding. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we're seeing quite a transition at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a rival company just down the road who's taking quite a few employees as well. So yeah, there's definitely there's some areas there that we need to address.
Mm-hmm. All right. So are you currently doing something for that sort?
Um, we're really at the moment we're restructuring, and like I say, I'm changing a little bit of focus and looking more towards the overall manufacture of the vehicle rather than specific program management of builds. Um, and I think we've just announced a new round of or collaboration with Hyundai, um, and that's going to see a restructuring. So yeah, we are going through a whole process at the moment to look at what the future resource
Mm-hmm.
requirements are for the company and how we can figure that.
Mm-hmm. All right. That's nice. Right. Let me see what else I can ask you about. Again, because you don't currently have external customers. Hmm, have you still have you worked on perhaps designing like a good customer experience, even though you don't have customers right now?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the things why I would say customer service would be our preference because my time at both Ducati, KTM, Ducati, and Icon was very, very much focused on building customer experience,
Mm-hmm.
end user experiences, and really sort of aligning that with marketing, sales, and overall company strategies rather than just looking at it in an isolated way.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. Is there anything that we haven't discussed for this role?
Um, no, I think we pretty much covered it. I think for me the big thing that comes out of it is just that whole. Um, really, I did look at it as when I first went and understood the issues that were happening, and looked at it in a sort of quite a customer focused way, and that you know setting expectations, understanding expectations, making sure communication was happening, um, really trying to build bridges and create a central focus rather than a combative one, and overcome
Mm-hmm.
that with building routes to success. So, there was a lot of I saw the previous experience, like I was saying, talking about customers and what that takes to really sort of. I implemented and used a lot of that to create a far more productive and effective environment.
Mm-hmm. All right. So there are a couple of things in your resume that we haven't talked about, and I would just briefly like to discuss those. So one is
Okay.
compliance. Can you tell me what regulations you were ensuring compliance with?
Um, in this specific instance,
Yeah, mm-hmm. For Canoe.
uh, for Canoe, I mean, there's crash requirements, um, and looking at you know the level of um, crash that the build can sustain. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's that was really our biggest focus throughout this. Like I say, we don't have actual external customers at the moment. Um, but the whole point of Beta Build was really prepare for Gamma and understand whether our computer-aided engineering was giving us the right answers and that we would be able to sustain the requirements of Crash.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then there's another thing that says that you improved upon the vehicle mass. Can you explain this to me?
Yeah, we went through a whole project to look at the overall mass of the vehicle. Mass is extremely important for us. in two ways. The performance and the requirement for power to move a larger mass is obviously greater. So either cut down on range or limit performance. But also for crash, the higher the mass of the vehicle, the more vulnerable it becomes within crash environments. So, we went through, and especially with the chassis team, looking at what was the overall mass of their components, how we could reduce those, look at more effective ways of distributing the mass as well. So it was a sort of project that we needed to go through. There was a target mass that we were over, and the initiation of it is still ongoing. I think it will always be throughout the product life cycle. There will always be a concentration on trying to reduce mass because it is such a huge benefit. So we were able to get good results from that, and definitely contribute to reduction in the overall vehicle mass.
All right. And you mentioned that there was a target mass, right? So were you able to achieve that?
For the components, we actually we came in and we were able to beat the target, and we came in at actually sort of 2 kilograms under our target mass.
Perfect. That's very nice. All right. Yeah. So, so far, has your performance been recognized in any way here?
I'm sorry?
Has your performance been recognized in any way? Have there been any awards or any professional recognition?
Yeah. I mean, on return from the build, then there was a one-time award of additional share options. And also, I think, transitioning over to manufacturing was really a sort of recognition of being able to contribute, understand the elements that were required, and then really sort of create a path to success. I think the other thing with all of this is I've never really done this before, so it's I'm able to sort of turn around and look at the very sort of the core requirements, and then create the communication, create the focus, and then get people moving in the same direction to achieve a common goal. And I think that's been recognised. This week as well, I've been asked to start looking at the customer service side for the vehicle as well. So I think it's the recognition is that I can actually build, create focus, create momentum, and then give people a route to success. So that to me was sort of quite an accolade that it's like, yeah, we need you to do this in other areas of the company.
All right, got it. So anything else that you want to add for this role?
No, I think that's it.
All right. So we'll move on to the next one. You were a director of service and flight operations here.
Yep.
Can you again tell me about your key responsibilities for this one?
When I arrived at Icon, there was no customer service department at all. So basically, I built it from